Beautiful and quaint Shepherdstown, West Virginia is home to the famous Bridge Gallery. The gallery has featured exhibitions of some of the most prominent artists in Maryland, Virginia, and West Virginia. It comes as no surprise that patrons come from hundreds of miles away to see the work of these celebrated artists. One such photographer is Mark Muse. Mark considers himself a printmaker first and a photographer second. He uses his camera as a reason to go places, to immerse himself, and explore. Mark works his digital files heavily to get the look he wants. He never alters images. His gift for exploration and locating the perfect shot is what sets him apart from most photographers. His photographs tell stories and convey messages, which gives them a timeless quality. Mark's mastery of subject, mood, and lighting and ability to convey stories through his works make him a unique find in the photography world. You like to talk about yourself as a printmaker first, and a photographer second. What does that actually mean?
Well, it means, I guess in this day and age, a lot of people, the end result of their photography is to post it online, to be viewed online. And so I'm distinguishing myself from that for one thing. Another is, a print, something you can hold in your hand, that has a beauty all of its own that is not evident viewing an image online. So that's the bulk of it. However, taking a photograph, when you're out making an image, that's just the start of the process. So it also alludes to the fact that all the work that has to come after it, that it used to be darkroom work and is now all computer work. But there is, even though my images might look like just straight, out of the camera images, they're not at all. I do a lot of work on the computer.
I would never say they look like they're straight out of a camera. They look like, really, they look like oil paintings. I mean, they are fascinating to look at.
Well, thank you.
Now, one of the ancillary benefits of being a printmaker, you say, is being a photographer. And what that actually means is you get to go out and look for things to photograph so that you can create these wonderful prints. And you like fly fishing, and I guess you like getting out in nature, and many of the things you do are nature.
Well, I used to, I actually haven't even fished for years now. I used to be a hunter up until I started at 12. I started hunting, and I quit hunting when I was about in my mid-30s or so, and I just finally said, why am I trying to kill these things that I really enjoy looking at? So I said, it became clear to me that it was an excuse to get out into places that I thought were beautiful and that I enjoyed, particularly at times of day that I enjoyed, dawn and dusk.
Another day.
So I just transferred to the camera and started using the camera to do the same thing.
You have to become one with nature to be a good photographer. Is it a dance, you think? Is it a cooperative work in progress when you go out in nature and you photograph it?
Not really, because nature doesn't respond to me at all. I'm the participant. Nature is there. We may choose to believe that we're apart from nature, but we're not. So it's a sort of a one-way interaction. Nature doesn't interact with me, I interact with it. Nature couldn't care less whether I was there.
But it probably appreciates the fact that you're documenting it. So you say your photography is really just the icing on the cake, that it comes from these travels and these meandering through nature and what have you.
Right. Yeah, it's like I said, it's an excuse to be out in beautiful places and just enjoy being there and being one with what's going on.
But you stand out, Mark. Do you have perhaps this keen optic eye or optic nerve that somehow sees or is the all-knowing and is omniscient in some way? Come on, there's something going on with a photographer when he or she goes out in nature and all of a sudden they go, oh, there's the moment. There's something going on.
Well, I firmly believe that all people have creative abilities. There are different talents that some people have that other people don't have, but in my case, I think it's more a matter of just persistence than anything else.
Where does the mood come from? Because all your photographs convey mood. Where do they come from?
I don't know. A lot of what I do and a lot of working images is a subliminal process. It's not a conscious thought process where I say, okay, I want to go here. I start pushing things around, moving things around, pixels, the tonality I'm talking about, until I start to get a feel that feels right to me, that appeals to me. And when I've got it to that point, I'm done. You know, it satisfies me, which really, I mean, I produce work for an audience of one, me. And I hope other people enjoy the work, but I'm doing it principally for myself.
You know, in television, one of the keys to good photography is a backlight. And you've got one on you right now. I noticed in your work that backlighting is so important that it seems to cut the image out, bring it to the fore, and give it a life of its own. Is there anything to that?
Yeah, and you'll notice that I do a lot of images in fog as well for the same reason. It helps when you're out in the forest. And it's a clear day. It's hard to separate different items from the background. There's a lot of noise, if you will, visual noise. And for example, fog gives you a much greater sense of depth. You'll have shadow images far in the background, but they're softened. They don't have the degree of complexity that the images closer to the camera have. That's basically what's going on. I use it for that.
Now, when you recognize these images of light and dark, I almost feel like you're creating persona. Not just a scene, but a persona. Something almost bigger than life, something that sets it apart from nature, not a part of nature, but sets it apart from nature.
It's, like I said, it's not an intellectual process on my part, so.
I think you're modest.
No, I mean, it's really not. I mean, the technical side of it is, of course, but as far as the actual images and what I respond to, how I produce those images is really subliminal. So I don't have a whole lot to say about that. I can speculate, looking back at what I've done, I can speculate about what that was about. But it just, the images connect with me internally, and I'm not sure what else to say about it.
Yeah. It's nice to know that you will be remembered by virtue of your photography.
Well, I hope so. I don't know that that's the case, but I hope it is.
Do you have a favorite work? I know we're going to take a look at some of your work over on the wall today, but do you have a favorite or two?
A favorite of my work? Mm-hmm. Well, sure, I have some that I kind of cycle through. There are some that wear better than others over time.
What's that mean when it wears better than others over time? What's that mean?
Well, I think it means that it's a more successful image. If an image has lasting appeal, I think it's a more successful image.
Okay. Why don't we go over the wall and take a look at some of your work?
All right.
Sound good?
Yep.
Mark, tell me about this one.
This is an image I made up on dolly sods, and obviously it was foggy. And it went through a number of different iterations before I ended up at this point. It was obviously a color image to begin with, and I think I produced it in color, and then I flipped it to black and white, and then I still wasn't happy. I added this texture to it, and did some other, quite a bit of manipulation, shifting the tonality around, and I'm really quite pleased with where I've ended up.
I mean, anytime you photograph an old tree, it's an old person. Let's be realistic. It's somebody that's seen a variety of things in its life and gone through a number of ages.
Well, I do love trees. I always have. And I just, there's so much character in them. As you said, they're old souls for sure. And it's unfortunate that we've stripped the Appalachians of their forests around the turn of the century, and so now we've only got second growth. I would have loved to have seen the majestic forests before they were logged. The red spruce and the chestnuts in particular. All my captures are digital, so they're all color. They'll begin as color. Most of them I finish as black and white. But if the image is about color, or if the color contributes significantly to the image, then I keep it as color. And I think that's the case with this one. That early morning sunlight burning through the fog, with these magnificent old sugar maples. As you can see, the top's blown off, This is up in the Jordan Run Valley, which is down the mountain from Dolly Saws.
One of West Virginia's best-known potters is Joy Bridy. Joy creates her clay masterpieces using a wood-burning kiln, a process where the potter must relinquish control of the pottery and trust in nature.
My name is Joy Bridy, and I am a wood-firing potter and ceramist living here in the eastern panhandle of West Virginia. Even though it's freezing cold January, I wanted to bring you out to see my wood-firing kiln, which I designed and built in between 2009 and 2010. I'll walk over and tell you more. The firebox of this kiln is based on an Australian design called a Bridy box, and it has a very efficient burn cycle. For the first day and a half, the fire is down in this little zone here, and I burn the sticks that are over on the right side of the kiln for about 24 to 36 hours. After that, when the kiln starts to heat up to about 1,000 degrees, I'm able to switch up to what's called the hobs. So this has a door on both sides, and there's brick arches that hold the wood up, and the wood that I burn at this point are the longer branches that are stacked behind the kiln and to the side. There are 3 rows of shelves from back to front that run from the floor all the way up to the ceiling, and they're stacked pretty tightly, all full of shelves, stilts, and pots in between. So when the heat comes up and hits the bag wall and goes to the top of the chamber, it has to move through all of those shelves before it can go out the vents in the back of the kiln. When it goes through, the heat goes straight into the chimney, and the chimney is actually the engine of the kiln. And the chimney has a lot of different controls on it so that I can keep heat in the kiln longer. I can let heat out faster. A lot of what I do in this firing is hold the chimney back. It's like a train engine. So there are dampers, metal sheets that go into these openings on either side that close off the chimney completely or just a little bit, or I can also leave it wide open, but I fire mostly with it almost closed. There's passive dampers here that I can pull to slow things down if I want the air to stay in, or I can close them off very tight if I want the air to pull through faster. These are the door bricks, so the door is not open when I fire, as you can imagine. So one of the last things I do is stack manually the rows of bricks that complete the door before I light the fire. I fire for 3 days around the clock, so it's usually a weekend, and I tend to have a crew of 2 to 15 people, depending. My favorite is around 4.
Joy, where did your passion for clay come from? Was it something as a child that perhaps you played with, or was there some influence in the family? Where did it come from?
That's a great question. I grew up in a family of makers, which means that just about everybody in my family, from my parents to my grandparents and on, made things with their hands. So it was completely natural for me to go about the world turning one thing into another. My mother jokes that I was either going to be into stained glass, hot air balloons, or clay, because when I was about 4 years old, she took some classes with a gentleman who taught all 3 things, and so I was exposed to them at a young age. I settled on clay for some reason, but it could have easily been one of the 3. I enjoy the very tactile nature of clay, and that it can really become anything from tiles on the space shuttle to a simple everyday mug. Clay is in so many things in our world.
You're doing something with a kiln that I have never seen, and that is it's a wood burning kiln. And I just happened to go to the Over the Mountain tour, and I bought one of your mugs. And then this morning before the interview, I looked at it, and you are indeed right. The meandering flame does make its own mark on this beautifully glazed piece you put in there, doesn't it?
It does.
And you're continually fascinated by the outcome.
I am. Loading a kiln is very different from loading other kinds of kilns because each piece affects the pieces around it. If the flame pattern is blocked, or if I choose to channel it into a certain area, that changes the pieces that are in contact with that flame mark.
Takes you 3 days to fire up that bad boy, doesn't it?
It does.
To get up to 2,500 degrees.
Yes. Yeah.
Otherwise, it doesn't fire.
Otherwise, it's not correct.
Yeah. But how does one, do you have scopes on it that will tell you the actual temperature that you've reached in this particular structure?
There's multiple ways to understand what's happening in the kiln. A very common one is to use cones, and those are pieces of clay that are made in a lab to fire to a certain temperature. And when they reach that temperature, they bend. Another way is to use a pyrometer, and that is like a thermometer that goes to a very high temperature. And at the top of the kiln, I have one little spot where there is a pyrometer, and that tells me the temperature of 1 cubic inch in the kiln. Not what's happening in the whole kiln, but that spot. So between the cones, which tells me what's happening in that tiny, 3 by 4 inch zone, and the pyrometer, I have an idea of what's happening in the kiln. Those tools are really helpful for somebody who's new and is looking for something tangible to hold on to. Once you've fired kilns for a number of years, and if you pay attention with your senses, there are many, many other ways to understand what's happening in the kiln. And that's more of what I pay attention to. And those are things like the quality of light in the kiln. Once the kiln gets to red heat, I wear goggles that are protective because the temperature is pretty hard on your eyes, both the light and the heat. And so one of the things that I look for is the color in the kiln. Are we getting yellow light, orange light? Are we approaching white light? Are the pieces dry? Are there crusty edges? Are there little tiny black rims still? Or are they glowing white all over? Do they look wet? Do they look matte? Do they look like they're dripping? Do they look like they're just not quite there yet? What's the flame pattern like? How is the flame moving through? What color is the flame? How short? How long? All of these things in the kiln are giving me much more information than the simple tools of a cone or a pyrometer. But between all of those methods, almost anybody who's firing can have something to hold on to.
You have said that you're smitten with the idea of letting go. And so I surmise that to be, once you put it in there, it's in God's hands.
Well, once I put it in, there's nothing I can do about that. Everything I can do is on a completely different level. I'm now managing fire and working with fire. And so the pieces inside are on their own.
So these amazing patinas that you create are going to be recreated for you. And therein lies the unique nature of these creations. One of a kind, as you described them.
Absolutely.
Can't duplicate anything.
Absolutely. I enjoy working in a series because I may have 5 or 6 objects that are similar, but when you take them out of the kiln, they're each so different. It's like cousins, or maybe siblings, or sometimes distant relatives.
And you crave playing with material. What does that mean?
I love being able to bring different elements into my work. So whether it's a native clay, whether it's very refined or whether it's very straight out of the ground, or using ash from my wood stoves as a glaze, being able to bring that in and understand what those elements add to the work.
And it can begin with something very simplistic, but it can turn into something very, very complicated. Because I've seen on your website things that take my breath away. But to think that you don't know what they're going to look like until they come out. That's
right.
Like Christmas morning every single day.
It is like Christmas morning, and the beauty is the more that I do the work, the more that I'm understanding what I can aim for in the process.
Now your work has taken you coast to coast.
Yes.
You've been very fortunate. You can't say that about many people who create pottery.
That's right.
How has that transpired?
Well, I was looking to understand wood firing and the wood firing process, and I'm standing on the shoulders of giants. It has been done over and over again across continents, all over the globe. So one of the things that I tried to do was to pinpoint people's work who, their work really inspired me for some intangible reason. And I cold called them and asked them if I could come fire with them. And every single person that I asked said yes. So I was very lucky to be able to not only visit kilns, but engage in the process of other artists as they worked. I was also able to talk to them about why they thought they were getting the effects that they were getting and how their kilns were designed to make those things happen. So I was able to go from Washington, D.C. to Seattle, to Maine, to Virginia, and try to understand my field a little better before taking
You might
the
be
full
one of the few
plunge.
people that have done that.
It's surprising how many people do.
Oh, have done? No, not create the work that way.
Yeah.
But visit all these
Yeah.
significant individuals who do this and tried to create this amalgamation of their work in yours.
There is a long-standing tradition of apprenticeships, which is very vibrant, and especially in our country right now, there are many, many opportunities for apprenticeships, and that's one of the ways that this information is passed down. But I did feel very lucky to be able to go for short times, for 1 month, for 2 months, and immerse myself in somebody else's process.
Now, you said you settled in West Virginia because you were looking for a certain environment and a certain studio element.
That's right.
What was it about West Virginia?
Well, part of it is its proximity to Washington, D.C.
True.
And the East Coast, and I'm able to get around being close to Route 70 and close to 81. But the deeper answer to that is that I really loved the opportunity to engage with the natural world. We're at the crossroads here of the C&O Canal and the Appalachian Trail. In both of those spaces, I visit regularly and find them very exciting in my work. We're at the Potomac and Shenandoah Junction, so I have rivers that I'm also able to visit regularly. So being able to spend as much time as possible outside was my goal for my work in living here in West Virginia.
And you do a lot of visiting with neighbors. You do a lot of interaction with neighbors. You teach in community environment.
I do, yeah.
So you are totally immersed in West Virginia.
Yes, yes.
Congratulations on that.
Yeah.
Now, one thing you said that is somewhat sad, but on the other hand, is total elevation of your work, is you said, rarely does my work make it into the cabinet because it's in your hand every single day.
That's
What a
right.
beautiful thought.
Yeah.
Metaphorically speaking, that's where it should be, in use, not to be admired, because something that's put in a cabinet, something that's hung on a wall, you can become somewhat used to that and walk by it without looking at it. Whereas something that's in your hand every day, you can further appreciate it by seeing something new in it.
I think there's a connection that happens when you use something regularly. When it's brand new, you might like it or enjoy the surface. It caught your eye for some reason and maybe felt comfortable. But when you've used something 15, 20, 100, 200, 300 times over the years, you understand that piece more intimately. You know the feel of it in your hands without even thinking about it. You know how the lip feels when you drink out of it. You know the exact spot on the rim where you prefer to use to drink out of. And that only happens over time. And to me, that kind of relationship is very interesting. It's the same relationship that I look for on my property or with the river. When I go to the same place on the river almost every day with my dog, and we see the changes over time. But yet I know these trees are here, these rocks are here, this water level is normal for this time of year. This is the kind of relationship that I bring to my work as well.
I also love the notion that you express that the meandering flames create these beautiful works of art, but then you hold them in your hand and the story begins.
Yes. Yeah.
Wow, what a great image. How does that make you feel as an artist?
That's my goal. And it's my goal not only for pottery, but for other things in my life too. That's one of the reasons why I feel like coming from a family of makers was profoundly important for me, because it's not just the pottery, it's the bathrobe that I made, it's the scarf that a friend knit, it's everything in my life I try to bring that element to. I just finished installing bathroom trim in my house that's from wood off of the land across the street from me that was cut at a sawmill, and then I cut and finished it and installed it in my home. And it's that kind of relationship that I'm looking for, and that what is the meaning that we're putting into each interaction that we have. So our interaction today, we're getting to know each other a little deeper.
There you
That's
go.
a meaningful connection. The same thing as when I pick up a mug and use that again every day. That connection is deepening.
Thank you for joining us on National Arts. Until next time, remember, art was meant to be appreciated, so you be a part of it.